you want to come up and, yeah. I think it's a short panel. Yeah, somebody can run for it. Thanks for doing this. No, thank you. I think it doesn't matter. No, yeah. Once I get up here and set, I can sort of tell people to put their seats. We'll get rolling. You should stop. You should also say, flight, so, yeah. Do we have enough chairs? Yeah. Okay. We just need more microphones. Hi, everybody. We are about to get started, so if you will take your seats, we'll get rolling. I know at least a couple of our panelists have, and our moderator, have flights to catch, so we are going to end this baby promptly. But I just want to say, wow, what a forum. This was amazing. You know that you're an incredible community, right? And you know that this sort of thing doesn't happen every day in a group of 650, plus people. So I just wanted to thank you all. I wanted to thank you for your honesty, your courage, your wisdom, your skill, your generosity, your grace. And for your dedication to expanding possibilities for the profession and to re-envisioning digital libraries as platforms that an ever wider array of communities can use to dream up better worlds. So as our keynoter, our wonderful keynoter, Anasuya Sengupta, reminded us on Monday, dreaming is a form of planning. Catherine Kim, who's frantically waving for water for our panelists, and is DLF's fantastic assistant director, is going to share some more specific than my general thanks, and some logistical bits and pieces and reminders to you before we turn things over to Yasmeen Shorish and to this remarkable panel that we've assembled today, and I'd like to thank all the panelists for saying yes. I guess that's it for me, and soon that'll be it for the 2018 DLF Forum. After Anasuya, dreaming is a form of planning, I will not say goodbye, I'll just say sweet dreams. Where's the slide clicker? I don't know. Okay. I'll get that.
Yeah, it's fine. Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Kim. I'm the Assistant Director of DLF. Just a few logistical notes before we start the closing plenary. We will be collecting any unopened and unused toiletry items to donate to the Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, as well as putting up a lanyard stand for lanyard recycling at the registration desk after the plenary. And for those of you who have already just sent us items, thank you so much. We're also selling DLF Forum t-shirts for $25, and it goes to support providing childcare assistance to our DLF Forum attendees. Thank you to those who have already supported us and to the Flexible team as this year's childcare service. So we are going to email you around a survey. Please tell us how we did. We try to improve every year, and your feedback is really important to us. This survey helps inform our work with our planning committee, and it helps us to know how we can do better. We'll be emailing the link out, so don't worry. And please save the date and join us in Tampa for DLF Forum 2019. We're really excited about it. Like Bethany, I'd like to thank you all, our attendees, our planning committee members, our sponsors, Clear DLF staff, and M Resort staff as well, and our closing panelists sitting before us for helping make this conference an inclusive and welcoming event. And on that note, I'm happy to introduce Yasmeen Shorish, our closing plenary moderator and our wonderful DLF Advisory Committee member, to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do this quick. I'm Yasmeen Shorish. I'm the Data Services Coordinator at James Madison University. If I had a clicker, I'd be advancing slides. Imagine. We are going to talk about enacting the mission of DLF. In short, DLF's mission is to advance the common good through creative design and wise application of digital library technologies. There we go, that's me. We have 6 panelists here who are going to respond to some question prompts that we devised to get at what that really means and how we actually live this work and do this work and improve upon this work through DLF's mission. So they have 90 seconds, and I am a cruel time mistress, and we'll stop them at 90 seconds to self-introduce. Begin. Emily. No, start with Emily.
Are we start with me? Hi, my name is Emily Drabinski. I'm coordinator of library instruction at Long Island University, Brooklyn. Formerly home of the Blackbirds, they merged our athletic teams and we'll be looking for a new mascot. I'm also president of the Long Island University Faculty Federation, the first and oldest private higher ed faculty union in the United States.
Bergis Jules.
Oh, no, sorry. Oh, sorry. There you go. Okay, so we're going to look down there.
We can't see down.
Oh, that was my fault. I'm sorry.
So, okay, we'll go with Bergis. Go ahead. We're all friends here.
Bergis Jules, Director of Equity Initiatives at Shift Design.
Now, Lorena.
Oh, hi, I'm Lorena Gathereau. I'm the Clear Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow at Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage, and that's at the University of Houston.
And now, Jessica.
Hi, my name is Jessica Meyerson. I'm Research Program Officer at Educopia Institute and co-coordinator for the Software Preservation Network.
Monica.
Hi, my name is Monica Montgomery. I'm the founding director and curator of the Museum of Impact. We are one of the world's first mobile social justice museums, curating at the intersection of art, activism, self, and society.
Mark.
Good morning, Mark Puente, and I am the Director of Diversity and Leadership Programs for the Association of Research Libraries, an institutional member organization of 123, I think is the tally right now, of some of the largest research libraries in the United States and Canada, and we're situated in Washington, D.C., and not to be confused with ACRL, which is an ALA
Which is different.
division. Yeah.
Which is different. Thank you. You all were fantastically thrifty with time. We have 30 minutes to have a discussion around some questions. So that means that I hope that you all will pick up on one another's comments and carry the conversation forward. And it's not just like, wah, 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 but like something really fruitful. It's the end of a long conference, so, you know. So our first question, I can't see any of you, I just assume you're smiling and think I'm witty. How do you, each of you in your roles and in the work that you do, think about your work as enacting the mission of DLF? What actions should we take to continue growing towards our potential of cultural heritage preservation and access as liberatory action? Please begin.
I'm happy to kick things off, but I'm very ready to hand the mic over. So in my work with the Software Preservation Network and other sort of cross-organizational initiatives that I have had the pleasure and the gratitude to be a part of, one underlying assumption is that everyone has knowledge and experiences that are unique. Everyone knows something you don't know. So everyone has something to bring to the table. And those unique experiences are the first ingredient of several for designing sort of the future of emancipatory, inclusive preservation and access systems. And I'll just say that coupled to this in my mind is the question that a legal advocate, Brandon Butler, raised during his session yesterday on the Code of Best Practices for Software Preservation. What could we do if we weren't afraid? So that can easily be expanded beyond the scope of like fear of legal backlash or systems of government to fear of change or fear of each other. So a second ingredient, which I argue is crucial to sort of valuing and foregrounding polyvocality, and moving from that to the strength and courage that it takes to implement meaningful and productive, like co-designing initiatives, is effectively to get everyone to say why we're here and what we all need out of the work. And that can be as simple as a 3-minute brainstorm on a call to get everyone to respond to their personal meaning for the activity or of the activity for themselves. And identify the intersection, which is the point of strength that will gird the enterprise moving forward.
Yeah, does that resonate with other panelists, or do you have contrary perspectives?
Is it on?
Other way.
Now it's on. I think the most urgent thing we can be talking about right now is power and structures through which to organize that power with each other for the ends that we want. And I think that has implications for both the kind of software project that you're talking about, as well as like, can we build a world that we can all survive in, right? And what has been striking to me about DLF Forum this time and when I came last year is an attention to talking about issues of power, of labor, of work, the work of being here, the work of making connections with one another. I was in so many sessions where the focus was on that. So when I think about what DLF Forum can do, it provides a structure for building power through and with each other for the ends that we want, which I think ultimately are bigger than platforms, although those platforms are important, but moving towards utilizing all of us to push back against them, I would say.
I would just jump in, coming from outside of the library world, but very much a cousin to it. When I look at the mission of DLF, advancing the common good, like really defining what that is, what is the common good, and who speaks for whom. I know that in the museum world, we're very much aware of privilege and systems of oppression, even in the telling of stories, and sometimes dismantling that to make sure that lived experience is amplified, much like what the keynote speaker was saying about creating knowledge outside of kind of supremacist ways of knowing is amplified. And so I look at things as a curator as the common good to me is what's best for the vox populi, for the people, as well as thinking of social justice as a continuum toward the common good and how to activate that. And then when I look at the part of the mission about creative design and wise application, that translates to innovation and intention. So how are we being innovative in our practice throughout the GLAM sector, and how are we being intentional in all of our actions that are public-facing and internal?
Fantastic.
Hello. Okay. I want to thank everyone right from the get-go for centering decolonial methodologies and theories, for focusing on community and community archives and collaborations. I felt that that was a very strong thread throughout the whole conference. And I think that's really important, especially coming from that social justice perspective. So at Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage, where I work, or Recovery for short, we really focus on the historical record and what is a part of that narrative, and trying to center the work of specifically Latinas and Latinos in the United States. But we're very aware of that focus on people of color and the histories that have not been a part of the historical record. And so that focus on decolonial methodology, on working with communities and community archives is really important for expanding the historical archive, which has not included our stories, which has erased us and virtually done violence to us. So I think that main focus on how we do our job is as important as why we do it.
So can I, after Bergis, I'll have something to say. Go ahead.
So, I think if we're going to talk about this, I always like to take it back to the people who are doing the work, or the people who might be called to do this work, and how we protect them, because the things we're talking about here right now, I don't know of any academic library that has the word liberatory in their mission, or sort of how they, or any academic library that carries out that kind of work, right? And academic libraries represent the places, that the majority of you here work in. But this kind of work is work that happens really outside of the missions of these places. And so the people who sort of do this kind of work, people like me, are often not rewarded internally for doing this kind of work, right? These kinds of projects that I'm known for, or that my colleagues are known for. We're not rewarded for this kind of work in the institutions where we work, right? When I used to work in academic libraries about a month ago. So, I think it's good to have these conversations, but we really need to start with how do we protect the people who are going to take on this kind of work, the people who work in academic institutions, these kinds of institutions which dominate these kinds of conversations, but not in sort of a central way as far as how they're going to do things, but mostly at conferences and in other sort of outside kinds of events. So how do we protect the people who are going to do this kind of work? I think that's where this kinds of conversations should start.
So my thing that I was going to say to you all was all of this centering social justice, centering decolonization, ways of knowing, can't only happen at DLF, right? This is a great place to come together and get ideas and get exposure to work, but how are we taking that back to where we do our day job and actually affecting that change throughout the institution? These aren't the questions I told you they'd be, sorry. But you're talking. So how are we doing that?
So if I could, oh, by the way, I'm not active on Twitter, so I just have to tell everyone that. So please, yeah, if you hate what I say, please don't tweet that out. Tweet at me about that. So yeah, this experience and these sorts of experiences are at the same time, are often very affirming for me, and it's wonderful to literally see what I hope are some of the benefits of the work that I do day to day at ARL, even though I can't really, question about attribution, I mean, that's fine. But causation, I'm sorry, not attribution. But I keep thinking about systems, and I keep thinking about, reward systems, sure, technology systems, absolutely, that are part of this, but in terms of, how we really scale up this work and really get committed to it, none of this happens in a vacuum, right? All of this, how we create value, ascribe value, it's based on systems of history, social systems, political systems, and to what degree does this community have a responsibility to be exploring that and to develop competencies and knowledge about that and the implications for the frontline work, that wonderful work that all of you do. And that's what I'm struggling with right now, to figure out, within my context of our membership, but these larger communities of practice, if you will, around academic libraries and archives and these sorts of things is, to what degree can we effect change if we really aren't addressing the root causes? And that means going back and thinking about how our practices have developed over literally hundreds of years. So I may be a little bit of a downer, I'm sorry about that, but that's something that keeps me up at night, and that I think if we could figure out how to address those, how to be thinking about those systems as a community, that we could have even more impact than what we've had so far.
Just to jump in, I would say that doing the work once we leave the conference fired up and inspired is really about coming outside of our comfort zones continually, going back and finding that community group, activist group, erased group, unconsidered group, and welcoming them in and seeing how a collaboration could spark off, or how you could just be a good neighbor, how we could do deep listening, how we can do some restorative justice, how we can invite them to do a pop-up exhibit or an open archive or something of that nature, and realizing that staying in our silos, staying behind our computers in our offices is not gonna get it, because silence makes you complicit. And so you have to come outside of yourself and reach out to the communities we serve, those great high dreams in our missions, and actually start connecting live with those communities.
And I'll add something to what was just said, that I'm going to be real explicit, and as a woman of color, I'm going to give you the plea to be an ally. We need allies. And we've been doing this work, people of color have been doing this work in libraries and in institutions for a long time, but we can't do it by ourselves, and we know that there are allies out there that can help us. So, when you go back to your institutions, please put it into practice. And sometimes they're little things like the ones you just mentioned, but sometimes you have more power to do something more about the actual policy or about the systematic structures of your institution. So, take that home with you.
And I think in addition to being allies, we have to be comrades to one another. So I've been thinking a lot about thick connections and the importance that thick connections have had for me in sort of workplace struggles that I've gone through, and how valuable it's been to me to have thick connections with some of you here. And I think that's how you keep the work sustainable, right, is to have those connections to one another. Not to say that they're not a lot of work, because I know we're all going to leave here and we're going to go back, and at my institution they're firing people. Maybe at your institution they're canceling the program that you care about, or they're firing people. They're probably firing people, right? And those sorts of struggles require a kind of comradeship and standing with each other against power. And you can be sure that people in power have extraordinarily thick connections to one another. They're getting cocktails right now while we're up here trying to figure out how to struggle. And I think taking stock of the connections we have to each other is a critical part of the work.
Just to build on the comments of colleagues up here, I would say, and also to the liberatory mission, being explicit about that, if that is in fact part of your mission of your organization, aspirational, and getting that in there explicitly. It may be acknowledging the time, so to go back to kind of incentive structures and organizational design, and also sort of grant project design. I think that if we all acknowledge that reaching out of our comfort zone takes additional time, when we already maybe have like a pool of usual suspects that we're accustomed to working with, and we know that we can get a project started up and initiated without much internal conflict amongst the project group, I think that when you have deliverables and a project deadline, that's often like an easier path, an easier way to think about it. So I think maybe just acknowledging the value and being explicit about the value and incorporating the time that it takes to reach out to additional stakeholders that you haven't previously in the project design or the project proposal design or programmatic design, whatever it is.
Can I say one more thing? I would also say, and I've seen this really be effective at other conferences, everything you've learned, let's take it back and share it. One thing I know about the librarian world, you all are obsessive note takers, very organized. Museum folks are all over the place, so again, kudos to you all. So take this back, put it in a Google Doc or a project management software or all the softwares you use, and share it with your colleagues. Have a meeting about, hey, I want to debrief about what I learned, what I gleaned, how I was fired up at this conference, and let's operationalize it and take those ideas to action and see how we can work this into our strategic plan, project plan updates. How can we literally take the learning and spread it across our institutions?
So I want to pick up on that and ask the panel here. I think a lot of us want to do that. A lot of us do that, right? But what we're talking about is dismantling structural inequity that's built up by a society and a globally interconnected forces at play. Small thing. So how do we do this one thing? And we're trying to do this one thing in that context where we hit this friction and we hit resistance of people who will say, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. I want to be really inclusive and representative, but we don't really have a relationship with that community, and you have these other priorities, and there's a backlog, right? So what strategies have you all had that have been, I'm just going to go positive here, effective in overcoming those systemic sort of bureaucratic, mundane roadblocks?
I'll take a quick stab at this, hopefully quick. And I'll kind of ground it down in a digital preservation ISO standard. Everyone's favorite, I know, I'm sorry. It just occurred to me that can we look at these existing standards, sort of the resources that we already have available to us that are out in the space, for thinking through the design of systems, but also the sustainability of the organizations that support those systems as this productive site for negotiation. So I was thinking about this. OAS and digital preservation is problematic on many levels. But similar to case law, those standards are revisited during scheduled, revision periods, and I'm unaware, it's unclear to me whether and who is participating in those calls for feedback. So if we use that as a basis for a jumping off point, one thing we can grab from that thing that already exists, like OAS as an example, is the need to explicitly articulate designated user communities. And so there was a session earlier today called the Who is Community session, and I may have gotten this title slightly incorrect, so I apologize to all the panelists in that group. But it helped to get to the heart of that question. So being mindful of our language and communications with each other. So Jarrett Drake was cited in that particular panel, is what we call community, and this is sort of my recharacterization or paraphrasing of that. So this is not precise, but is what we call community our fondest hope or wish? Is it fictive in Jarrett Drake's terms? Or do we use it to co-opt others' experiences to substantiate our vision of what may or may not be shared? And so to go back to OAIS, thinking about, okay, here's something that's already asking us about designated user communities and asking us to be explicit about that. The underlying assumption here is that your whole digital preservation infrastructure is more meaningful and sustainable if you can be explicit about who those groups, people are, and designated users that you're not serving but would like to serve. So I don't know if that's sort of a grounding down on the platform side, but I think that, bringing it back to what resources are already on the table and how we use them as points of negotiation to get at that question.
I want to ground this statement with a quote. There's a civil rights leader who's kind of had their story hidden for many years, and it's now being told. And their name was Pauli Murray. And Pauli Murray was a lawyer, a clergy person, a civil rights activist, did so much to kind of advance Brown versus Board of Education and the litigation that won that case, and just was a gender nonconforming person that was so dynamic for their day and age. And the quote that I always center everything in my life and in my professional dealings that they said was, you can't start to heal until we tell the truth. We can't start to heal until we tell the truth. So I think before we take on the weight of the world and its problems that were not created overnight, that have persisted and prevailed for centuries and decades, we have to do some truth-telling in ourselves, in our institutions, writing it down, outlining what are the problems and issues, and then attacking it chunk by chunk. So whether that's hiring more diverse, inclusive folks, or whether that means approaching projects with a fresh lens, not trying to be dominant but having shared authority, or whether it's speaking truth to power about entrenched institutional issues, all of it is the truth-telling, but I think it has to be really outlined and clear, like what is the truth of the situation.
I think it's you have to turn it on. Begin by turning it on. I think, from a union perspective, I'm always thinking about what is the terrain on which we're going to fight. Right, and it sounds sort of like a battle metaphor that maybe I don't love, but where are we going to struggle? What's going to be that site for struggle? And I think that varies institutionally. So for us, the site of struggle is our union contract, our collectively bargained agreement. So if I could say there was one thing everybody could leave and do that could fundamentally change power relations, it would be to go home and organize your workplace. Get involved in your union if you have one, start one if you don't. If you're in a right-to-work state, you can still have a union, but if you don't want to go that route, identify where is the sort of mechanism where people in your organization fight back. Is it the faculty council? Is it, and then try to get on the board, try to get elected, try to be in charge, try to run the thing, and there will be many more losses than there will be wins, and it will be crushing and painful along the way, but occasionally you'll get a win, and those wins are really powerful, and along the way, I think we've developed those thick relationships through struggling over things together. And if you can do that with people at your workplace, you'll end up, I think that's the sort of locus for change for me.
Yeah, so, we don't have much time, but so it's really hard to kind of have this conversation. But I like to think about the context of, the audience here and who is in the room and where we're talking about getting this work done and just, facing a little bit of reality. The majority of the people in this room work in academic libraries, but how many deans and high-level academic library directors are in this room, right? These are the people who actually, I mean, if you've worked in an academic library, you know that's where the change has to happen, right? So how many people here feel comfortable enough, and especially people of color, right, feel comfortable enough taking these ideas back to your academic library and feeling safe enough to do that? So until we can address that question, I don't know how we can have this conversation in academic libraries in a safe way. And that's what I meant with my comment about safety and recognition of people doing this work, because we face a lot of pushback from the folks who run these places. So, you know, I really think that's a key thing we need to address if we're even going to have this conversation. So I'd like to ask DLF, you know, how are you addressing these issues with library deans and directors, right? The people who sign up their institutions to be members of DLF, right? So how are you addressing these issues with them?
And I'll also, you know, I'll say that it's not just the deans and directors. Like sometimes you can have a dean and director that has a lot of great ideas, and it all dies at middle management, right? And so there's multiple levers that a pressure can be applied to, but I think the question is a good one, is like, what does this organization what does it ask of the institutions in order to be a member? I'm just not on the advisory committee, I can't answer that. We'll discuss later, it's a great question. Other thoughts? Before I get back on track to the questions I told you I'd ask.
I feel I have to respond a little bit to Bergis's comments, since deans and directors are my primary constituency. And I'm going to take a little bit of a positive approach, I hope, because what I have seen in my last almost 10 years at ARL, it was supposed to be a 3 to 5 year commitment, so just so everybody knows. Here I am almost 10 years later, but I've seen a tremendous amount of change. And I'm not saying it's enough change. And I'm not saying we're anywhere near as a community where we need to be. But I am actually inspired by the fact that we are having conversations, some like this, and we could not have had these conversations maybe even 5 years ago with that community, or 7 years ago. So I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by the fact that there are in fact more people of color in those ranks than ever before, as an example, and across lots of other identities as well. I'm also inspired by the fact that in terms of strategies, I think one of the things that maybe I'm going to say I'm pretty good at is building relationships and expanding what I would say my political map. So it's not about the 123 figureheads of these institutions. It's about the people that have worked or are working in these institutions, and the people that we have allowed, cultivated, developed relationships with, that have been open to developing. I like to say that they're champions, because there's a difference between saying you're committed to the work and actually doing the work, right? And the people who are doing the work are the champions. And so I was speaking to the Clear Fellows. Somebody posed a question. I'm in an organization. I'm in this temporary, term position. I don't feel like I have any power. I can't bring these issues up. I would love to be committed to this work. And I said, quote unquote, and I said, "You're a white dude, right?" I had to confirm that. And he said, "Yes." And I said, "You have tremendous power, right? You have the power to influence all of those around you." And so I just, like I said, I want to take sort of a positive, acknowledging significant challenges that we still face. But I think that there are more people willing. I have, in my 10 years, I think witnessed an increase in the number of people who are willing to engage in those conversations, but most importantly, engage in the actual work.
So
I'm going to respond.
Yes.
So, I think I have just one comment and one question. The people who run these libraries are more than figureheads. They absolutely decide what happens in these libraries. So that's one. And would ARL be willing to live stream the next ARL directors meeting where we talk about these issues?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's a journey. It's not, it's not a destination.
And I just want to acknowledge how much work it is. Like in between sessions, I'm trying to get 4 people to one meeting about one contract issue, and it's taking hours. So the uphill battle of that. And also just to push a little bit, Bergis, I think the dean makes a lot of decisions, but I wonder what would happen if we thought more creatively about how we could deploy our power to force those decisions to be different. Like, I would love to see some kind of a march on the boss's office. I think we have a lot to learn from people who have struggled in other sectors and how you move the needle on things. If you can't get 4 people to wear a button, I think it's very hard to build that power, but I think it's an essential step.
So in our remaining minutes, could each of you give like a 30-second thing for all of us here, from your perspective, from what you feel like the most connected to and in the space in DLF, that you think, all right, this is where I want to see change occur. This is the thing that is my like hill to die on. I'm a child of war, so like everything breaks down to battle analogies. I'm like fine with that, just honestly.
I think we need a better, stronger analysis of power that we build together and share through listening to each other and figuring out what our concrete demands to power are and acting on that.
I'll just take a moment to recognize all of the members of what we call our sort of affiliated communities at Educopia, as well as the different staff members that participate in our cross-organizational applied research projects around digital curation, scholarly communications, by saying that there's a strategy to opting into those projects, and I've heard this articulated fairly explicitly by several of those participants, which is that by bringing sort of this external focus to whatever priorities maybe are being undervalued or recognized within their organization, that is them asserting some sense of their own personal power within their organizational structure. And so I think that is sort of a positive note, that there is evidence that people are figuring out how very personally they can maybe reshape how those priorities are discussed and what that means in terms of implementation for programmatic efforts internally.
I would say there should be more cross-pollination within the GLAM sector. There's a lot we can all learn from each other and do together. I enjoy the pop-ups that I get to do with libraries and archives, and I'd love to see more of that happening. Also, let's commit to not doing transactional community engagement, not just to come around when it's the Ethnic Heritage Month or when it's convenient or when there's a grant. But really being deeply embedded and vested in the communities that we serve, especially marginalized communities and communities of color. And lastly, just let's do more truth-telling.
You said a lot of what I was going to say. Listen to your underrepresented communities, those marginalized communities need your help. And a lot of the times they're in your institution, and you have the opportunity to pass the mic to them, like listen to them, give them the opportunity to collaborate with you, and then do what you can to forward any agenda or change anything strategically if you have that power.
I can't say anything more than what you all have said so eloquently and powerfully, but the only thing I will add is that I think that sometimes people from, maybe some communities of practice, I mean, they see, it's difficult for them to see alignment, maybe with what their function, their role, and the tie to this work, social justice work, inclusivity, I mean, all this sort of thing. So I would say take some time, listen to these stories, right? Honor the people that are sharing these stories with you, and think about the implications, because, 2 years ago, did we think that we'd be having conversations about description, decolonizing description, about, the implications in the scholarly communication, ecosystem? I mean, these are really changing. So think deeply about the implications, because there is nothing that we do that doesn't have some tie, some alignment. So that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, and I think we should try to help shift some legitimacy to cultural heritage spaces where liberatory work is already happening and has been happening for a long time. and not, try to focus all our time on making these things happen in academic spaces. So community-based archives are one place, public libraries. So let's try to support those spaces.
So I'd like to thank our panelists for their insights and expertise and sharing their thoughts in this very unpredictable and loose form way. I think it's great. And I want to thank DLF, the DLF staff, and of course the leadership of Bethany here at DLF. I think she's just, I don't know where she is, but because I can't see anything, but she's amazing, and I really appreciate her. So that's it for DLF 2018. Let's all go catch our planes that leave in an hour and 20 minutes.